and people will, I assume more people are going to be joining us, but my name is Seth Manukin. I'm the director of MIT's graduate program in science writing. Thank you all for coming. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about the program. You'll meet a couple of people involved with the program. We will explain the logistics of both applying and coming here. We'll talk about finances, and then we will leave as much time as possible to questions from all of you. So I wanted to start just going over some of the basics of the program. So the GPSW is a one-year full-time program. 1 year does mean 12 months. It is 2 academic semesters plus a summer internship. So our students actually graduate in October and not in June, in early June. And we have our own private graduation ceremony, which is always delightful, and which we were able to once again this year have in person. Our program is taught in a way that is a little bit unique. Instead of taking, you do take courses, but those courses are organized for the most part into modules. And we'll get into this a little bit more. But so you'll take a course called the Advanced Science Writing Seminar. Within that, there are a number of different modules covering a number of different topics. We also allow internships during the academic year, which is something Chris Couch is going to talk a little bit about. But to start out, I wanted to share a very brief, like 5-page, 6-page slide deck explaining a little bit about our program. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm just share my screen, attempt to. Okay. All right, can someone confirm that they can see this? Yes, okay, great. So this is our instructors for this year. And you see underneath their names, it explains what they all are teaching. So Tom, who's here, will talk about his documentary film course. Alan Lightman, who has been with our program since it started, teaches a section on essays. I work on long form narratives and your thesis, which is another unique part of our program. And then we have a number of people who are also working full-time in one capacity or another as journalists, which we think is really crucially important for the teaching of journalism. So Karen Weintraub, who is teaching our features section, is USA Today's COVID reporter. Ashley Smart is who teaches op-eds, is actually at MIT. He's at the Night Science Journalism program at MIT and is an editor at Undark. Tim Deschamps is works full-time at Ars Technica and teaches our news section. Cynthia Graber, who does our podcasting section, is a longtime radio journalist, has done a lot of work for public radio, and is also the co-founder and co-host of Gastropod, a absolutely delightful podcast about the science of food. Don Fallick, who is at the University of Maryland and has done data journalism for the Wall Street Journal, as well as several other places, does our data journalism unit. Zara Hirji, who's one of several instructors, who's also an alum, is a science reporter at BuzzFeed, focusing mostly on climate issues, and she is teaching our environmental journalism unit. Chris Couch, who you will meet in a second, is another alum, and she teaches our freelancing section. She teaches a section called the Lab Experience, which she can talk about, and also is in charge of our professional development for the program. Emily Anthes, who's there with her dog. Shannon, do you know Emily's dog's name? You're muted, but it looks like you don't anyway. So,
I think it's Milo, but that might have been her previous dog.
Okay. Emily is works full-time at the New York Times. She's one of their science and COVID reporters. And Sarah Childress is doing our investigative unit. Sarah is an executive producer at Frontline, and is someone I've known for several decades. And so this gives you a sense of who we have working in our program. In addition to this, we have thesis advisors who are also from outside of our program, some of them. If we have students who are focused on a topic for their thesis that I think, or any of us thinks, might be particularly suited to someone we know as an advisor, we will try and work that out. One of the things that we pride ourselves on at the GPSW is having a very personalized approach to our students and to our program. This is just by way of bragging about what our alums have done. So this is just looking at the last 5 or 6 years of our alums and just looking at awards they've won in the last 2 years. I won't bother reading through these, but this is to just give a sense of what our alumni do after they leave our program. And as you'll see, we have some of these, Rachel Becker and Josh Sokol and Chris Couch graduated in 2015. Is that right, Chris? You were their class, right? Yes. But then we also have students who graduated in 2019, 2021, 2018, who are also winning awards and publishing books and doing incredibly impressive work. This gives you a sense of what our instructors are doing. And in this, I specifically did not include faculty. So Tom and I and Alan are not included here to highlight what some of our instructors are doing. And so you see the awards that they are winning. Apurva Mandavili, who along with Emily Anthus is one of the Times's COVID reporters, won one of the highest prizes in science and medical science reporting, especially the Victor Cohn Prize. That's given out for a body, for a lifetime of work, essentially. It's a career award. And these are some examples of the types of stories that our alums have written, again, over the past year, that are making an impact in the world. And Lisa Song, who is an alum who has won a Pulitzer, has done a number of really remarkable investigations for ProPublica. Phil McKenna, who might be the most published freelancer ever, is now no longer a freelancer, is Inside Climate News, has an incredible history of publishing award-winning stories that that no one else had noticed. Zara has done work on sexual harassment in the sciences, along with their work on climate science. But again, this is just to show what the type of things that our students are doing after they leave our program. And I did not include in this list COVID reporting, but we do have, as I said, Emily and Apurva are covering COVID for the New York Times. Megan Scudellari and Nidhi Subaraman are both covering COVID, also alums for Nature. Nidhi's on staff there. Megan, it seems like is on staff there, given how much she writes, but actually writes for other places, including Nautilus. And then Carolyn Johnson is the Washington Post science reporter. She's another alum. And Karen, as I said, is one of our instructors, who is the lead COVID reporter for USA Today. So let's see. I will try and stop. How do I stop sharing now? Not sure why Shannon, do you know how this is, I feel like I'm asking my children to show me how to work on my computer. This is something I've done.
There should be a red button either at the bottom of your screen or the top that says stop share.
Yeah, there is not.
Okay, well,
Let's see. Chris, nothing?
usually I have the option to stop you from sharing and I don't. Thanks, Zoom,
Here
for
I go.
doing
I
another.
got
Oh,
it. I got
yay.
it was hidden underneath my screen. Okay, so apologies for that. So one thing that we do not teach in the program is how to use Zoom. Yeah, so that's a very quick introduction to our program. I'll talk a little bit about the actual logistics of the year, and then I'll let Chris and Tom talk a little bit about what they do. So in your 2 semesters at MIT, you will probably be taking 4 courses per semester. Of those 4 courses, 3 of them will be required courses in the GPSW. So you will have 1 free course to take an elective in both semesters. And you are free to take any course at MIT or at Harvard, provided the professor allows you in. So you might not be able to take like an advanced surgery class at Harvard Medical School. But there is a huge swath of classes that you are free to take. And our students have taken an incredible variety of courses. I would say maybe half of our students try to supplement what they're doing in the program with electives, and half of them want to do anything but more work on the type of things that they're doing. And so we've had students take movement for actors, I think was one elective, is that right, that Laura took a couple of years ago. In the fall, voice and movement for actors. In the fall semester, the 3 required courses that you take are actually 2. So we have the Advanced Science Writing Seminar, which is the equivalent of 2 courses that meets for 6 hours a week. And in that course in the fall, we have modules on news, news writing, podcasting, data journalism, investigative journalism, environmental journalism, and op-eds. And that is all in modules in the fall semester. Your other required class in the fall is called a thesis seminar. In the fall semester, it's really a feature writing seminar. You will write a 3,000 word feature and also work on your capstone project, which is a 6,000 word thesis that you begin working on the minute you get here, get assigned an advisor, usually in October, and then complete by May. You also get some money and funding for thesis travel. So January at MIT is called IAP, Independent Activities Period. There are no classes then, and you are free, and we encourage you very strongly to travel for your thesis research. We've had students go to New Zealand and Hawaii, and either braver or more foolish students go to Minnesota in January. But what, Tom?
Alaska. We had one go to Alaska.
Yes. Did we have someone go to Alaska? I don't think that was when I was here. God, I would not have recommended that, but yes. So that's a very quick synopsis of the fall semester. In the spring semester, the Advanced Science Writing Seminar only counts as 1 course. It meets for 3 hours a week. And we have the continuation of investigative journalism, a book review segment, an essay segment. We also have the second of your 3 courses in the spring is the thesis seminar, which in the spring does just focus on the thesis. And then we have Tom's documentary film course, which I'll talk about in a second. After that is your summer internship. Students do have the option of doing a second internship in the spring in lieu of one of their elective in the spring. That's something that, again, Chris can talk to in a second. But I think more students have been doing recently, still a minority of students, but it seems like more students are certainly interested in that every year. Another advantage of having a program the size that we do is that not only can we tailor what we do academically, but we have the ability to do things like go out and create internships. There have been a number of situations in recent years where we've had students who really wanted to do an internship at an outlet that doesn't have internships. And in several of those cases, we were able to talk to them and essentially create our own internship for them. When that happens, we do have money for funding. So all summer internships are paid, regardless of whether or not you're being paid by the place you're working for. You will get paid in some way. Something else that we really focus on here is mentorship. And I think that's probably a good transition to throw to Chris, who can talk about both mentorship and professional development. And if you want to just briefly talk about the lab experience as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, I would love to. It's nice to see so many people here. So my name is Christina Couch. I work for the graduate program in science writing part-time. So I do some teaching for the lab experience program, and I run all the professional development programs. And then I also am a working science journalist part-time. So I graduated from the program in 2015. So I've been through it in addition to working here now. So as far as professional development goes, we've really worked very hard to develop that out in the last few years. There's been a lot of concentration on making those programs really robust and starting sort of the minute that that students walk in the door. So even before classes start, we have an alumni mentorship program. So all incoming students are paired with an alumni mentor who's working in their field. Sometimes those pairings are done by beat. So if you are a climate reporter, we will try and find a working climate reporter to pair you with. Sometimes it's done by medium. So for audio reporters who come in, we try and find somebody who's doing really great audio reporting. We do alumni mentorship starting from day one. That's a person that you can contact and stay in touch with, throughout the year. From there, we also set students up with research assistant positions. So this is a big way that we subsidize the cost of tuition. Research assistant positions are positions within an MIT department. Historically, we've worked with places like the Department of Biology, the Engineering School, the School of Science. And what we do is we place a student in their communications department. The student works 10 hours per week, and that funds a significant portion of tuition. It's beneficial financially, but it's also pretty beneficial in terms of building out resumes. So when students come in, if they don't have a ton of clips, then they're automatically getting published clips that way. And it's a year-long position you can put on your resume. So that's another way that we build out professional development. We also work with the American Geophysical Union. For the last couple of years, we have had our students have all covered the fall meeting, which is absolutely enormous and of crucial importance for anybody who's interested in covering Earth or space, Earth or like atmospheric science. All of our students have been student reporters for that for the last 2 years, and those clips are automatically published in EOS. I also work with students. Anytime that you complete an assignment after it's graded, you're welcome to pitch it. And I'm the person you would come to help you do that. So I'd sit down with students, we figure out what would be a good outlet, and we can pitch those projects out. In the last few years, we've had students just publish in like bananas places. We've had Slate, Nova, Atlas Obscura, Mental Floss, MIT Tech Review. I think we've got somebody coming up with the Boston Globe. Somebody just sold something to NPR. So that's been really successful for us. Science News, Science Magazine, all of those places have just come out of student projects that were done within our program. So selling is a big way that we do professional development as well. Students also have, I'm your personal professional development guru. And so we work with students to make their resume great, their cover letters great, to figure out internships that are really going to work for them and sort of get them where they need to go. I meet with students at the beginning of the year. We meet periodically throughout the year to figure out what exactly do you want to do, and are there alumni we can connect you with? Can we bring in guest speakers that are going to be, along the lines of what you want to do? Can we connect you with somebody who's working in that field? How can we build out your portfolio so that you are a better candidate for those types of internship positions? We keep a very extensive internship database of how everybody else previously has done in terms of their internship, what they loved, what they hated. It gives people a lot of insider intel into what hiring managers are looking for. And in recent years, we've had a lot more students inquire about doing a spring internship instead of an elective. And so we've been able to craft internships that are either part-time during spring semester, or we've been able to make full-time internships in summer. Those have gone extremely well. We had a student last year who really wanted to do a multimedia project biking from the top of the US to the bottom of the US. And she was able to, we made an internship with her at Orion, and she was able to do that as a project-based internship. And the project that came out of that is this like really beautiful multimedia thing. So I think that that's kind of a summation of what we do professional development wise. I also teach a very tiny class called the lab experience, which is essentially like mini field reporting class based on MIT campus. So for that class, one of the things we really want students to be able to do is to access the amazing resources at MIT. There is so much cool science happening here. So for the lab experience, students get to pick 2 labs at MIT, and they do essentially observation rotations in both of them. So they do 6 hours in each lab. They write a profile based on one of their rotations, and they write an explainer piece based on the second one. And students have gotten to do some really, really amazing things with that as well. We had a student who was in the LIGO lab the year that gravitational waves was like the #1 breakthrough, scientific breakthrough of the year. We've had students do all sorts of biology, chemistry, tech labs, quantum computing, all sorts of stuff. So that's been incredibly successful. Does that about cover it?
That about covers it. Thank you. As I said, Tom Levinson teaches the documentary film course. Tom is both an author and a columnist and a journalist and a filmmaker. He wears many, many hats, and teaches our documentary film course. So Tom, why don't you talk about that?
Okay, very briefly, I mean, if this is an area you're interested in, please pop it up in the questions. As Seth said, we want to get to questions as quickly as possible. The documentary class is, it's science documentary making, and it's designed to do 2 or 3 things. One, it's designed to give you a basic introduction to the craft of telling stories with moving picture and sound, and not just sort of interviews that you can shoot with your phone, but actually crafted narrative stories that could be feature or analogs to features, or even to larger storytelling ambitions. So you learn some of the technical stuff. You get exposed to more of it through a sort of master class kind of structure, where we have some of the shooting done by professional, nationally recognized craftspeople. So that's one side of things, just sort of learning this, the techniques required to work in this medium. The next thing that the course teaches is production, which is basically how you organize resources of time and money and equipment and people in collaborative teams to produce a finished work, a complicated work. And that's, of course, something that we hope, even if people in the class don't have any intention ever of producing a feature-length documentary, that the skills of organization and the interplay between organization and creativity help you in however you express yourself. And the third thing is it's a really intense and sort of slightly off-angle class in storytelling, because there's the discipline of actually communicating with pictures as well as words really helps, I think, a lot of people become much better writers, even if the entire rest of their career is spent entirely in prose. It's a standard one semester class, so you're not going to become Errol Morris by the end of it, but you'll know what it would take to get there. There is some training at the beginning of the class in basically filmmaking with what you already have, lightweight filmmaking, the tools that we now have in our pockets, phones and very cheap and limited other bits and pieces add up to an incredibly powerful filmmaking tool right now. So we spent a little bit of time at the beginning of the semester teaching you how to use that, how to shoot interviews with your phone that you can then put up on a website to accompany your print stories and so forth. There are a number of exercises that are designed to really expose sort of some of the basic units of visual narrative technique. And then the capstone project are team-based 3 or 4 person crew, student longer form short documentaries, 6 to 8 minutes, sometimes slightly longer. These are the ones that are partly shot by a professional. And this is where you really put it all together. There's an intense amount of learning that goes in the preparation for an execution of the shoot, and then an extraordinary training in storytelling through the editing process, which is the last sort of month of the term. And that's really, the goal is to give you, if not the sort of full suite of skills and experience needed to go out and direct a long form documentary, starting in May of your year, but to give you all the tools you need to pursue that if you wish, and if you don't wish to do that, to give you enough other useful insight into work that will help you tell complicated stories in print or any other form. So back to you, Seth.
Great, thank you so much. And just again to point out, people are already asking questions. Some of those we'll answer live. Some of them we've also typed out answers to, and you can see those answers. So there might be questions up there that some of you also have. Okay, I'm gonna touch on a couple more things before we open it up. One question we get a lot is what type of students come to us? And there is no one answer to that. Pretty regularly, about half of our students come from a humanities background and half of them come from a science background. The one thing that we really require is a sustained interest in writing and communicating about science. So we have had students who, for their application, have one of the things we ask for is writing clips or examples. We have had students, some excellent students and students who we've admitted to the program, who wrote clips specifically for the admissions packet. So you don't need to worry if you have not done a ton of science writing in the past, but we do want to see a sustained interest in science writing. The other thing that we really look for is writing ability. We feel like we can teach you an enormous amount in the time that we have you about a bunch of different areas of journalism, but we do look for strong writing ability. In addition to about half of our students coming from a humanities background and half from a science background, the age of our students ranges. Typically, we have a couple of students who are right out of college, and then students going anywhere up to mid to even late 30s. I would say our average age is probably mid to late 20s. If you take all of our students in a given year and add them together. We've had students who have come to us after getting PhDs. We've had students who've come to us after starting PhDs and realizing that that was not what they wanted to do. We've had students come to us after a decade career in a different field. So there really is no prototypical applicant or accepted student to our program. By that same token, I would say probably half of our students have some journalism experience. And that ranges from, this year we have some students who have more than 5 years in the industry, who've worked for places like the New Republic, who've published in National Geographic. We've had students who have been the editor of a 100-person college paper, but we also have students who have absolutely no journalism experience, do not know what an inverted pyramid is, and have never taken a journalism class. And again, I think we're able to sort of navigate that and have the program work for everyone because we are a small program and because we can be so individualized in what we do. Let's see, I guess the last thing I want to touch on before we open it up is finances. So MIT is not inexpensive. The GPSW has made a very, very strong commitment to doing absolutely whatever we can to make sure that our students do not need to take out loans to attend our program. So for the last at least 4 or 5 years, at a minimum, we have covered all MIT related expenses. So that means tuition, fees, anything that could, health insurance, anything associated with MIT. For the last several years, on top of that, we have also covered some of your living expenses. And we have been able to inch closer and closer every year to covering all of your expenses. We are not quite there yet, but we are hopeful that, and I've just been going through some budget discussions and it looks like we will be able to, that next year we should be able to offer around $20,000 on top of all of your MIT expenses. So that's that comes out to something like $82,000 that we'll be able to offer you in aid. Those aid packages are dependent on these 10-hour-a-week RA positions that Chris was talking about. And those positions come with a stipend and tuition assistance. And those positions are roughly worth $30,000 in aid. So that is a significant part of your total package. But because typically all of our students do those, that's something that we integrate into the program in general. And we also try and make sure that that is curricularly applicable. So what you're doing there is going to work with the curriculum as well. We do have internal fellowships at MIT, and we apply for those very aggressively on behalf of our students. And sometimes we're able to get those. There are some fellowships that we get that cover all of your expenses, living and MIT related. And in those situations, then you would not need to do an RA program. You would have everything covered. We don't get one of those every year, but we have a pretty good track record on getting those. One other thing about finances, any external fellowships or scholarships that you get will not count against you in terms of how much aid we give you, unless you get an external scholarship to cover everything. We're not going to pay you to attend the program, but anything you get outside will not count against the total we give you up to the point that you receive full funding. We do strictly need lines admissions, so you regardless of your situation, should request financial aid. There is no downside to requesting financial aid. And just to tell you a little bit about how we allocate aid. So our basic philosophy and approach is that if we want you equally here. And so we don't start out offering some students more than others in an attempt to get them to come to the program. We essentially have a pot of money that we divide up. And then if there are individual circumstances among the students, oftentimes, we are able to go and get a little bit more funding for some students, either by my lying prostrate and begging at the door of one or another dean, or through applying through some other internal means. So that covers our financial situation. But again, we will do absolutely whatever we can to make sure that you do not need to take out a loan. And in fact, if you do need to take out a loan to attend the program, I would probably recommend not doing that and waiting either until we can get you more aid, or until if you get into a program that can offer you more, that you do that. I do not think that people should go into journalism with loans associated with it. There are enough challenges in this industry without that also hanging over your head. I'm going to try to share my screen for one more second just to show you if you have more questions, one good way to do that. So this is is that working? Yes. Yes, okay. This is our website, sciright.mit.edu. It contains a description of what we do. Looks like it is thinking about loading. I'm actually at home, and so that probably means that both of my children are online and playing games. It gives an overview of the program, who we are, what our curriculum is. It has a little bit more information on the people who you saw in that earlier slide. It also has information about how to apply. All of that is right here. And it has information about what we're doing, what our alumni are doing, what stories people are publishing. So again, that email address is sciright.mit.edu. There is, at MIT, there is, I believe, a $75 application fee. If that is going to be a financial hardship for anyone, let us know, and we will work with you to make sure that it's not a hardship, probably by waiving it. So please do not let that stop you from applying. We have decided that GREs are optional, so you can take them and include them. Sometimes they give helpful information, but they are not required. The other things that are required as part of your application are a college transcript and letters of recommendation, along with your own writing and a CV. Look how easily I stopped that share that time. I think, unless Shannon, Chris, or Tom, any of you think of anything that I or we have left off, we will go to questions.
One thing?
Yep.
Because I know we have some international attendees in this session. So if you have attended a college, if you have a degree from an English-speaking university, you do not have to submit the TOEFL or IELTS scores. And that should be identifiable by transcripts. That is to say, your transcript should either be in English or it should indicate that all the classes were taught in English. If you do not have that, you will need to submit TOEFL or IELTS scores. And folks, if you want to ask your question person and live, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you, and you can actually talk to these distinguished instructors. or you can type it
That might fix
in,
me.
or you can type it in the Q&A and we will get to it.
So I'll start answering the questions that we have. Again, we have about 11 questions that have been answered. I'll take a quick look at that and see if any of those are things we should also mention here. But one question is, do we have preferences on where letters of recommendation are coming from? Really the people who know you best, with an addendum to that, that they should know you within some context that is applicable to your application. You know, your sixth grade teacher might know you very well, probably not the best person to write a recommendation, but writing instructors, people you've worked with professionally, anyone along those lines. Shannon, the questions you just took out have already been answered, is that right? Okay. How many writing samples should you, so the question is, for the application process, how many writing samples should we submit? What type of writing samples do you hope to see, especially from someone who doesn't have a journalism background? So that's a great question. I believe we asked for 3 writing samples. We actually we don't have
we don't specify a number.
Right.
And when the program was founded, that was on purpose, because some people have longer samples and we would not ask them to submit many longer samples. And some people have shorter samples and they might want to submit more shorter samples.
I think one thing that we really preach in the program is to learn how to empathize with your reader and figure out where your reader is coming from as in order to keep their attention. So empathize with us. Everyone you see here is on the admissions committee. Don't submit 60 pages of writing samples, no matter how good they are. We have had students do that, prospective students do that. I think 3 is probably, Tom or Chris, you want to jump in? I think 3 is probably about average for writing samples. Again, if you don't have writing samples that show your interest in science and your interest in communicating about science, you can write one for the application. Tom or Chris, can either of you think of, I know we've had a bunch of people who've done that. I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head. Can either of you think of?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yes. A few years ago, we had a student submit who was working at the FDA, and he wrote his writing samples specifically for the application. And he did a couple samples that were, the way he set it up in his application was, you know, this could be an article for such and such publication. And I remember distinctly because he included one of his pieces that could be for children. He had a children's science piece in there. And I thought that was really effective.
I think what you've just heard is absolutely true. One of the things to do, we sometimes get a huge range of types of writing, and some of it's, you know, and sometimes that's great, and sometimes it's really sort of far enough off the beaten track that it's not useful to us in understanding who you are. So think about how you would, in some senses, pitch the piece to the admissions committee. I'm giving you this because it shows this about my writing. And remember that we're trying to select a class that is excited by and committed to writing about science. So we've had people give us, you know, really interesting, well-written academic papers from, you know, their studies in classics or what have you. And I've learned stuff from a lot of applications that were not actually helpful to the applicant. So just be careful with that.
And by that same token, I'm sorry, Chris, were you going to say something?
I was going to say, every year we get somebody who submits a science fiction piece, and they're delightful. I love science fiction, but they're not always, that's not what we do. And so it's not always super helpful.
But by the same token, if the writing that you've done about science is of a technical nature or is academic papers, that might show us your interest in science, but that's not going to be super helpful in terms of helping us understand how you can communicate about science. One other thing before I get back to the questions that reminded me of, some students apply and there are sort of things that stand out about their application. We had a student who flunked out of college, definitely stood out about his application. He was a great student. We've had students who have had years at school where they've really struggled for one reason or another. If there is, or we've had students who've submitted GREs and whose scores in one area they think did not reflect their abilities. If there is something like that on your application, let us know and explain what was going on. We do look at transcripts, obviously, but really the most important parts, the top 10 most important things about your application are the writing that you're going to submit. And so we don't want to see a record of D's all the way through college, but if there was a year where you really struggled, let us know what was going on, and don't let that cause you undue anxiety.
Just jump in one last thing. I know this was about writing samples and not about the 2 essays that are integral to the assignment, but those essays are really important. We look at those very carefully. That's where we get a sense of who you are in your own voice. And I'll give you the filmmaker's advice. Show us that you are passionate about science rather than tell us that you are. Describe the things that you've done, the experiences you've had, and so forth, in ways that we've had a few applications that really those essays read like the sort of 5-paragraph essays everybody does in high school. That's not terribly effective. And the other thing is, if you can, show us something about your knowledge of and experience and pleasures in science writing, not just science itself, but science writing that you have to date. If there are people you have read that have moved you or inspired you to apply to us, this kind of thing, let us know. We can't intuit that, and that's a very powerful way for us to understand where you're coming from.
And if you cite one of us, spell our names correctly. That is something that not everyone has done in the past.
Don't address it to NYU.
Yeah. What is defined as strong writing in terms of admissions? I mean, I'm not sure there's any one way to answer that, but writing that communicates what it's trying to say clearly and effectively. We're not looking for, there's some writing that is very kind of writerly, where it's very clear that a lot of effort was put into that. We're not looking for that. In fact, my personal preference is for writing that almost disappears into the background, that it feels so fluid that you almost don't notice that there was writing behind it. Yeah, so there's not one clear way to answer that. Let's see, there's a Abdullahi asked, what do we look for in international students in particular? And for students coming from Africa, how will the thesis project topics look like? Are projects focused on issues in the States only? And what proportion of the intake has any kind of work experience when they apply? Got it. We look in international students, we look for the exact same thing we look for in domestic students. We have had we've had more international students over the last 3 or 4 years. But we look for the exact same qualities and skills that we look for in domestic students. Your thesis does not need to be focused on domestic issues. In fact, when students have traveled to places around the world, it is for their theses, it's because their theses are focused on topics that are not based in the United States. In terms of work experience, We don't look at work. So let's say you have experience as a freelancer. We don't look at the fact that you have experience as much as we look at what you can show us from that experience. So what types of pieces you were able to produce in that experience. But again, because at least half of our students have no journalism background, that is definitely not something that's required. One thing about writing samples, you should indicate whether the pieces that you're submitting were edited. So if they were, lightly edited or received serious editing by an editor, whatever it is, you should indicate that. And the last question there was, what scholarship opportunities are available for international students? MIT does have some very odd and very specific scholarships. Like there's one for students of Irish descent that grew up within 10 miles of Boston College. Is that
20 miles of the State House?
Okay, sorry, 20 miles of the State House. And so there are some of those very, very specific scholarship opportunities, but in general, it's the same aid that is available to the rest of our students is available to international students. What is the acceptance rate for our program? We always, not always, we typically accept 10 total students for 8 slots. For what we hope is 8 slots. 8 is our sort of happy place in terms of class size. 9 or 10 students for 8 slots. And the number of applicants can vary from 50 to 70 to over 70. So there's a fair amount of fluctuation. It's been higher recently, the last several years. Yeah. Does that, Shannon, is there anything else about that? That no?
Sounds about right.
Okay.
Seth, do you want to take Sophia's question? She's got her hand up.
Sure. She's, oh yeah, great. Yes. Or no? Jacqueline or Sophia?
Nope. Hang on. Sophia had her hand up, but now it's down.
Okay. But Jacqueline seems like she has her hand up. Do you, Jacqueline?
Nope. Okay.
Nope. Okay.
Lost that one.
Okay.
Sorry. Going on.
Okay. So programs to maintain or improve diversity in faculty and or those pursuing degrees. Yes. So if again, if you look at our faculty, one thing, and our instructors, one thing we've focused a lot on is in diversity across all lines. So racial diversity, gender diversity, age diversity, and that's something that has really changed the complexion of our instructors. I think when I came to the program, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when I came here, the diversity that I added was that I was a white male under 50. I think Marcia was here, but it was a different looking faculty, certainly. So, and in terms of improving diversity for applicants, that's something that also we've worked very hard at. We have done everything from Chris and I have worked on searching through historically Black college and university student journalism classes and newspapers and reached out individually to students, to making contacts with professors at historically Black colleges and universities and other colleges and universities that are that have large minority student bodies. So I would say that is a continuing challenge for us, and something that we're making some progress on, but not as quickly as we'd like. And it's something that we'll continue to work on. Yeah, Chris?
One thing I want to add is that we've also worked very hard to create a professional development pipeline for students of color. So we're very much in touch with the Ida B. Wells Foundation, National Association of Black Journalists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When students come in here, we very, very much, first of all, we try very hard to create a sort of family-like environment, but we also work very hard to make sure that that there is that the diversity pipeline is pretty clear from when they are a student here to when they're leaving.
I know there's another question about resources to help students of color when they're here. There are also a range of things we do there, and that range includes things like helping students establish contacts within MIT, to doing something, and this was Shannon's idea this year, to when the students arrived for orientation, we gave them MIT shirts and MIT swag, essentially, as a way, because we had minority students in the past say that they sometimes felt as if they were out of place on campus. And so that was a very small way of trying to show them and have them be able to show the rest of the community that they do belong on campus. MIT is a place with a fair amount of diversity, and actually probably more socioeconomic diversity than any peer institution. In fact, not probably, definitely. MIT does not accept any legacy admissions, and as a result, the proportion of our students who are in the lower 20%, whose families are in the lower 20% of overall wage earners in the country, is, I believe, 20 times higher than any of the Ivy League institutions or any of the other peer institutions. The diversity means a number of different things at MIT. Do you incorporate workshops into the curriculum? Yes, in fact, I would say the curriculum is almost entirely, not entirely, but almost entirely taught in a workshop manner. We will have some sort of lectures, but essentially what we do is either work on your pieces or workshop pieces that have already been written. Tom, I know you've, when you've done long form, you've workshopped like particularly good pieces of journalism that had come out within the last year, as if it was a student's work.
Yeah, it's a very effective, I think it's sometimes hard particularly early in a semester to really dive into student work, because there's all the, sort of almost public performance stuff. But when you take on either a very good or in some cases a very bad professional piece that's out there and dissect it, it can really help, I think. Also, in some years, depending on student interests and the relaxation of pandemic restrictions and so forth, I've really enjoyed leading a kind of a journal reading club where we pick a piece, an exemplary piece, again, exemplary good or exemplary bad, and dissect that over beer or soft drinks and pizza at one of the student pubs on campus. And that also has multiple good functions.
We have a couple of questions about what the relationship is like within the cohorts. One person asked, what is the atmosphere of the cohort? Is it collaborative, casual, welcoming? What are the relationships between students like? So we 8 students, that's not a big cohort. And one of the things that we preach very strongly here is that to succeed as a writer, it's important for you to have a community of writers. And we hope that your cohort will be one of the foundational communities for you. Sometimes it works better than others. We've had classes that have had reunions every year in different parts of the country. That obviously was a very strong cohort. But when we are making up our class and also in terms of the activities that we do, that's something that we try to foster. So to give some examples of that, last year was obviously very challenging because of COVID. We were literally one of the only classes that met in person. We bought beach chairs for everyone and met outside very late into the year when we were bundled up. But then also I had the students several times over in my backyard, and we set up huge heat lamps and a projector to do movie nights. And then when it became too cold to do that, we did sort of online group screenings. So we really try and foster an environment that where students are supporting each other. There are some projects, primarily in the documentary course, in Tom's course, where students will be working together. But there are other projects where, and again, largely because of the workshopping nature, where you're really always working with each other in one way or another. Does anyone have anything to add there? Chris, yeah?
Yeah, so I graduated from the program in 2015, and I still talk to my cohort every week, at least. We have a Slack channel, and since then, since graduating, we have thrown each other work and job opportunities. I actually co-authored a book just this past year with somebody I graduated with. For us, for 2015, we were a really close cohort. Since then, we've really, like, from the GPSW side, we've tried really hard to foster those relationships because it makes for a better learning environment, number one, but also it's a smart professional development move. We've seen students over and over and over again working together collaboratively once they leave, or doing projects together, or sending out job application, like job opening information. We maintain a really strong alumni network, and so when somebody who graduated decades ago has a job opening where they are, our entire alumni listserv gets a notice about that. We have tried really, really hard to foster those connections, both within cohorts as well as between cohorts.
Yeah, some of you who've already graduated from college, I'm sure, are already getting inundated with fundraising requests. You will hear from us as frequently, but we will not ask you for money, or at least have not yet asked our alumni for money. We take the sense of community really, really seriously here. And once you graduate, you will not be rid of us. A couple of years ago, we had Marcia Bartusiak, one of our longtime professors, retired. And so we had a graduation, at graduation, we had also a sort of retirement party for her. And students came from 18, 19 years ago right up to the year that this was held. It was a striking example of how close the community is and how close it remains over years. And as Chris said, that is important, both because it's just more pleasant and it's nice, and also in terms of professional development, that's really important.
I do want to add that if any alumni from the program have $20 million sort of knocking around looking for a home, we will happily name the program after you. Yeah,
true. Okay, let's see. How detailed should we be in the honors, publications, and experience application, since we'll be uploading a CV? I would say you don't need, don't treat it like an academic CV where if you have published, 100 pieces, you add all of those. I would include the highlights. And then the rest we can see on your CV. The supplementary essay, should we focus on one specific experience or highlight multiple experiences? Again, I would say whatever you feel like best illustrates your skills and strengths as a writer and as a communicator. That might be talking about several experiences that all fit into the same sort of general area, or it might be one experience. There's not a right answer to that. The only right answer in terms of the applications and the writing is whatever you think puts you in the best light, or shows your, not puts you in the best light, but shows your abilities most clearly. And some of the essays that have been most effective have been prospective students talking about challenges that they faced and how those challenges have reinforced their commitment to communicating about the challenges of the world. So there's really a wide range of ways to go about that. What are the key differences between our program and other top science writing programs? Great question. So there are a couple of key things, and again, Tom and Chris, you should jump in if I'm missing anything. I would say, and not to be facetious, but the main difference is that we are at MIT. We are at the premier scientific institution in the world, and really any area of science that you could possibly be interested in, we will have among the most accomplished people in that field. And so having access to that type of researcher and scientist is something that is really invaluable, not only for the work you do here, but also because one of the things that we encourage you to do and really want you to do while you're here is build a network of sources that will help you throughout your career. And so having access, and we have had, Tom can speak to this, you know, we've had scientists who are so busy that they schedule discussions for when they're walking from one building to another, participate in documentaries. And we've had Nobel-winning scientists tell our students that the documentaries that they did were the best illustration of their work that they had ever seen. We had, who was it, Tom, who came to our piece?
That was Wolfgang Ketterle, who won the
Right.
Nobel Prize in Physics. If you want to see the documentary he loved, it's on our channel. It's called The Coldest Place in the Universe.
And the coldest place of the universe is at MIT.
Right.
That is actually true. So I would say that's one big difference. The other difference is, there are a couple of other differences. One is our focus on really individualized attention. Our instructor to student ratio is higher than 1-to-1, which I think is pretty unusual. And that sort of permeates everything we do. We also are, I believe, the only science writing master's program that requires a thesis. So I would say one thing, students who are interested in long form work, I think tend to look to our program. There are some other programs like the Santa Cruz program is more heavily focused on internships. It's just a different philosophy. But I will say that I think all the three main science writing programs, NYU, Santa Cruz, and our program are all very strong. And I think there are benefits to all of them. My view is that we are the best program. But I also, there have been students who we've admitted who it was clear that they would be better somewhere else. And I've told them that I would love to have them, but I think that they would be better. They would probably enjoy another program more. One thing we cannot compete with Santa Cruz on is mascots. The Santa Cruz mascot is the banana slug, which is as cool as the beaver is. The banana slug, I think, is much cooler.
Is the NYU mascot the Bialy?
Yeah, I don't know what the NYU mascot is.
I just like to add one thing to that answer, which is,
please.
Each of the major programs have a somewhat different emphasis. And there are a couple of other programs that are more purely journalism programs with some specialty journalism approaches that a couple of our students, a couple of our admitted applicants have ultimately chosen. One of the things that, oh, I see, someone has, oh, thank you, Shannon, it's the Bobcat. I prefer the Bialy. The thing about this program is it is a science journalism and science writing program inside a major research university. That's what Seth was saying. But one of the things about our background is that we emphasize that writing true stories about science occurs in many genres. That's why we have an essay segment, for example, taught by a brilliant essayist. It's why we do the emphasis on long form stuff. A lot of our students, ultimately end up wanting to write books. We don't emphasize that as a we aren't teaching you how to write a book proposal in the second semester, but we try and provide the framework for students to think across possible genres. The core of our program is journalism, because journalism is to science writing. Science journalism is to science writing as mathematics is to physics. You can't do it without being solid in that. But we try and say there are paths you can go from there that extend from daily journalism all the way out to anything you can imagine to communicate science in public.
Yep, Chris.
One thing I would add here is size. Size really counts in terms of, it just makes a big difference in terms of how many students are in your cohort. So because we have such a small number of students, we've been able to be really nimble in terms of tailoring our curriculum towards, if there's a thing that this particular cohort is really into, we've been able to add professional development workshops specifically on things like book writing, on things like getting agent, on things like we had students who really wanted to do health reporting. So we've been able to bring in journalists to kind of tailor our curriculum in that way. We're also really flexible in terms of what internships we accept. And so when I came into the program, I really love games in general, and I was able to do 2 different internships specifically in like science game writing. And the reason I was able to do that is because the faculty and staff at the time was dedicated to helping me figure out what my individual, like what area I wanted to explore individually. Shannon is a genius on every alumni that's come in here. We talk about students that were here 5-10 years ago because we know them really, really well. And a lot of times we've been able to follow their careers after they leave. And so it's not uncommon for alumni to say, work here, or to come back and be instructors, or to do professional development sessions. And the reason that that is so possible is because we know them really, really well when they come through.
The other thing we do is we have at least one, well, with Chris, we always have 2 alumni on the admissions committee, because the insight that people who have done this program and then gone out and worked for a few years, the insight they bring to applicants is just wonderful.
Yeah, and to build a little bit on that, we actually have, I think every year for the last 5 years, we have changed some aspect of our curriculum from one year to the next. Sometimes in response to just changing trends in the industry. That's why we added a podcasting and a data journalism unit. But sometimes, like this year, several of our students coming in expressed a strong desire in investigative journalism. And so the type of investigative project we're working on this year is not something that we have ever done before. And it hopefully will turn into a frontline documentary. That's the goal. But again, that was in response to things that we learned about our students after they had been admitted. So we do our best to tailor things to what all of you want. Will there be admissions interviews? No. So you will not receive notice of interviews. One thing we have discussed over the years is talking to sort of a group of finalists. We've decided at this point not to do that because a number of issues, including some people are more comfortable talking over Zoom than others, and we don't want to disadvantage those people. Once you get in, we will talk to all of you. both about the program and also about the financial aid packages. And but you probably will not hear from us before that. Is the program a good fit for someone interested in creative nonfiction on science topics as opposed to science journalism? I think, Tom addressed that a little bit. I think that our program will position you to be able to write creative nonfiction about science. I think really the question is whether you are sufficiently interested in the journalism aspect of it to spend a year focusing on that. If that will feel like something that sort of gets you where you want to be, or if that will feel superfluous. But certainly, what Tom said about math and physics and science journalism and science writing, I think strongly applies. And the sort of principles that we teach you about how to take complicated concepts and ideas and communicate them clearly to a non-specialist audience, about how to hook in people's attention in a world in which there are always 15 more demands on their time than they have time to do. All of those apply to any type of creative nonfiction writing. How detailed should the thesis proposal be? Yeah, so we do ask in the application for any thesis ideas that you have. Those are never really longer than like a paragraph, I would say. Put some thought into it. We want to see that it's something that you're thinking of. And certainly the more thought you put into it, the better off you'll be when you get here. But it does not, you don't need to spend, a month or even a week doing hardcore research on it and giving us examples of what has been written in the field. But just, if you can develop an idea to the level of essentially an elevator pitch, that's probably good. And the last question, oh, no, it was going to be the last question, but someone else got in under the wire. If our application shows that we're interested in multiple areas of science and we haven't zeroed in our specialty yet, would that be detrimental? No, definitely not. We do not, you are not forced to choose an area of science to specialize in when you're here. In fact, we do push you away from areas that you might have specialized in because we want to train you to feel comfortable writing about any area of science. So if we have someone who came in with a physics background, we would strongly encourage them not to write their thesis about a physics topic. And if we have a student who, regardless of the background, is writing about the environment, an environmental issue for their thesis, we would push them in a different direction for their feature. So we want you to have, we want you to feel comfortable in really as broad an area of science as possible. That doesn't mean that we will teach you about all those areas, but hopefully we will teach you how to ask the questions that will get you to where you need to be. What support? Oh yeah, Tom.
I was just saying, we have in the past referred to this as a writer's comfort zone, and our faculty embody the different ways you can sort of work in the world. When Marcia was here, she was the sort of archetypal example of somebody who found an area she wanted to write about and spent 30, 40 years and is still working in the area of astronomy, astrophysics, cosmology. And that's a great way to have a great science writing career. Find something you're passionate about and just own it. I think Seth and I believe Chris as well are all kind of magpies. We find stories that interest us because of some storytelling hook. We want to know more about it. That's an equally wonderful way to be a science writer. And within the program, we encourage both. And we structure some of our assignments. They say absolutely be in your comfort zone. And others where we say we really want you to exceed it. I'm not sure what the current protocols are, but in the past, for example, as Seth said, we've asked people to stay out of their comfort zone for their feature, but pursue their passion for their thesis. When back before the dawn of time, when I ran the lab experience assignment, I really wanted people to work in labs outside the area that is that still the case, Chris? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, and that's for the explicit reason. Different scientific disciplines have surprisingly important different sort of cultures. The way, what constitutes a meaningful result, how they talk about journal articles, how they compete, all these kinds of things are different. And you don't know that from the outside. So we try and encourage you in all kinds of small and large ways to become aware of the inner experience of science, as well as the external sort of production of results and things that you can, that seem like the things you should be writing about.
And I will also say that I think, from a personal standpoint and also kind of from a philosophical standpoint, one of the coolest things about science writing is that you get to learn about all of these new areas. You get to find something that is incredibly cool and interesting, and as an adult, then go and find the people who know more about that than anyone else in the world and say, sit down with me and talk to me about that. I'm someone, Tom has spent his career in science writing. I started out as a media reporter. I wrote a book on the Red Sox. The reason I ultimately ended up focusing on science is because I felt like there were a limited number of stories I could write about baseball, but there is literally no limit. The limit is as big as the universe is in terms of things you can write about in science. And so what is so exciting to me is that I can spend years learning about vaccines and learning about cognitive biases, and then when I'm done with that, spend years learning about rare genetic diseases. And it's an incredibly, it's just a cool, exciting field for anyone who finds themselves sort of perpetually curious about the world. So it looks like the last question we have here is, what support do you provide students as they look for their first job post-graduation? None. We cut you off the second you graduate. No, I mean, I said that we view you as part of the community here. We take that very seriously. It's not just the job that you get post-graduation. It's, I just last month wrote a recommendation and made a call on behalf of a student who was my first thesis advisee in 2011. For better or worse, once you're here, we will work with you. We have a student this year who's interested in working for the Wall Street Journal. And a couple of days ago, I got in touch with the science reporter at the Wall Street Journal and talked to him about this student. And so, we want to see you succeed. As far as we're concerned, the best measure of our success is your success. That's why I showed you the list of what our students are doing. If you are not doing what you want to do when you leave here, that reflects poorly on us. So we will do everything we can to make sure that you are able to do what you want to do. Chris, as an alum, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts on it. So I want to talk a little bit about the kind of mechanics of getting your first job and sort of how the process that starts really early when you get here. So as of late September, October, students submit an internship plan, which is an idea of the kinds of internships they're interested in, a resume, cover letter, and a personal portfolio. So immediately when you get here, we're going through those materials and making sure that your resume really is as like reflective of how great your writing actually is, and that you have a professional portfolio, and that the basic materials you're going to need for having that first job, that you're already ready to go before you ever walk out the door. As far as first jobs go, first of all, we will accept a first job in lieu of a summer internship. So if you get a full-time job in science writing, we would just count that as your internship, your first 10 weeks. So very welcome and encouraged. I'm sending emails to students periodically saying, hey, these are the internships that have crawled across my desk recently, or here are job openings, and we will keep you on those lists for after you graduate. So for now, the lists that I'm sending are going out to the current class as well as the class before. I constantly have students who are writing to me saying, hey, I'm interested in applying for a job at this publication. Do we have an alumni there who might be able to give me some intel on what working there is actually like? We don't just want you to get a first job. We want you to get a first job in a place that you're really going to thrive. So those are a couple of those sort of basic mechanics that we're doing in order to make sure that our students are employable. Our research assistant positions can really help with that. So regardless of where you intern, or if you intern, during spring as well as summer, students are automatically walking out with a full year of communications experience. They're also walking out with a summer internship already under their belts, and in some cases, if they do a spring internship, two internships. So your resume is already being built, even if you never sell a piece while you're in the program, which a lot of students that we have are selling pieces. So those are some ways that we try and really, really build you up so that by the time you are applying for those first jobs, like you're really ready. Yeah.
And I should say not only your first job, but subsequent jobs also. We oftentimes, something will come up on our alumni list, a job opening, and then the next email that will come up is, I work there, let me know if you're interested in this, from another alumni, let me know if you're interested, or I worked there a couple of years ago, I know a lot about that place, let me know if you want me to talk to anyone. So it's not, we don't just try and help you get your first job. As long as you're willing to talk to us, we're willing to try and help you.
Students also have my services all through summer. So while you're doing a summer internship, if your next step is, say, applying for a fellowship or applying for some sort of really cool funding, we will work with you to do all of those, to do all the paperwork necessary for that, to really get your application as polished and beautiful as possible.
And I just want to add the obvious, which is we have a really good record in this. When we recommend people for fellowships, they get them to a very high, success percentage. Our students, I'm not going to pretend that journalism isn't a sort of fraught industry in general, but our students broadly, there are, everyone's different and all that, but our students seem to do very, very well in finding jobs, in moving to more responsible or higher up the ladder. It isn't just what we do, it's what the results of what we do are. And it's so far we can, I think, all still hold our heads up high and have clean consciences. We're educating people into a meaningful career path.
I'm just looking through the questions that we've answered some questions by typing the answers. I'm just glancing through, and Tom, I don't know if you saw my direct message, but I know you're time limited. If you need to split, by all means do, and don't feel bad about it.
Okay. Is anyone out there have a question specifically about documentaries or anything directed at me personally? Because if not, I should in fact probably say goodbye and say I'm looking forward to reading all your applications when the time comes. Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, bye-bye now.
There are just a couple of these that I'll answer very quickly in case people didn't get a chance to see them. We had a question about what degree it is exactly. It is a Master of Science in Science Writing, so it's a Master's of Science degree. we do not allow students to defer admission. And that's because so much of what we do is dependent on the makeup of a class. And also the number of applicants and the quality of applicants might change year to year. So we don't allow students to defer admission. We have had several situations, several cases where a student applied and got in, and for one reason or another was not able to go. We had one student who was supposed to finish her PhD, and her PhD advisor wasn't going to let her do it on time. And then they've reapplied and been admitted the year later. So if you are admitted, that's it's not a guarantee that you will be admitted again the following year, but it's also a pretty good indication of what we think about you. By that same token, we have had a ton of students who have applied, not gotten in, or not gotten in off the wait list, then reapplied and got in. A ton of students. So if you apply and don't get in, and then don't go to a different program, definitely do not assume that you should not apply again. And that goes doubly and triply so if you're on the wait list. Another question that no one has asked, but that we often get asked is, do students get in off the wait list? The answer is yes and no. Sometimes we do. We are able to take someone off the wait list, and sometimes not. It's, it just depends on how many students of the initial number that we admit end up coming.
We had one typed in that, if you don't mind, I'll answer it just so that
Sure.
it's on the video. Somebody asked if there was any advantage to submitting your application early.
Yes.
And the answer to that is not really, but sort of. We don't have rolling admissions, so we don't review applications as they come in. They don't get looked at until after the deadline of January 15th. But if you submit your application a little bit early, it gives me time to process the application and make sure all the pieces are there before the deadline. The most common missing pieces are the letters of recommendation. And I send out a confirmation to everyone who submits an application saying whether it's complete, and if it's not, what's missing, which enables you then to go out and get those things. So maybe a couple of days before the deadline, or, get it off your desk now.
Right. Yeah. Or if you think that some of the people you've asked for letters are particularly busy or unresponsive, a couple of days, more than a couple of days, just so if they fall down and don't do what they said they would do for you, you can have time to find someone else. Yes, Chris.
One thing I want to add is that when I applied to this program, I thought, oh, there's no way I will ever get into this, like ever in a million years. And I was so convinced that I wouldn't get in that I actually planned my wedding for like right when classes started, because I thought, this is just a lark. And then when I got here, every single person in my cohort had the same feeling. And the longer I've worked here, it's true year after year after year. It's just 7 to 10 students in a room, all shocked that they are here. So if you are intimidated or questioning whether you should apply, please don't rule yourself out. Every year, all of our students are surprised that they are here. And so please, please, please don't rule yourself out.
I mean, and in fact, this is something that Shannon has talked a lot about, and I've talked a lot about. I think it's not only everyone applying to the program. I think everyone at MIT has imposter syndrome on some level. And I'm always, I'm on a committee right now, a search committee for the next dean for our school. And so I'm dealing with colleagues from the anthropology department and the philosophy department, and just brilliant colleagues. And they all also feel imposter syndrome, as do I. What Chris said times 100. Don't apply because you think you're not the type of person who would be at MIT. There is no type of person. There is no one type of person. One other question that I know does get asked specific to international students. Now I lost, okay. In terms of international students, we don't count as a STEM program. You'll get a year of, what does OPT stand for? I forget now.
Sorry, there's some barking here. Optional practical training.
Yes, so international students will be able to stay in the United States on an OPT visa for a year after graduation. They will not get the 2-year visa that STEM students get. We've had students ask if there's some way we can finagle that. We cannot. We have absolutely no control over that. I think that
there's one more question that just came in.
Oh, okay, great. Is there a preference for students specialized in one? No. So the question is there a preference for students specialized in one area of science or students who have a broad interest in different areas of science? There is no preference. Either or is fine. Just be true to who you are in your application. Not surprisingly, we've had a lot of students recently very interested in climate science. And that's great. It's arguably the most important issue facing our world. Yeah, we have a preference for students who have an interest in science. That could be science, or it could be one specific area of science. So I don't see any other questions in the typed answers that I think really need to be addressed. Shannon or Chris, can either of you think of anything that we did not cover? No?
Just with the application stuff, if you have a question, don't guess on the application.
Yeah.
Don't just sort of shove it off into the ether and cross your fingers. Go ask. Hit the email. It comes to me. I'm a very friendly person, and I will answer to the best of my ability.
Yeah.
A couple of people asked various questions about internship spots. We have had an absolutely huge variety of internship places. I put a list in the comments of places we've had students at just since 2019. They include the New York Times, STAT, NOVA, NASA, IBM, the GBH Center for Investigative Reporting, the Boston Institute of Nonprofit Journalism, on and on and on and on. We've had an incredible variety, but we've not only had students at very traditional print publications, newspapers, magazines, online venues, but we've also had students do internships in documentary film, in digital production, in podcasting, and radio production. I did a digital game and a tabletop game for my internships. The variety is really extensive.
And for the summer internships, they can be outside of the US. You can travel.
And there's some fun as well.
What? Oh yeah. So I'll give a final call for any last questions. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Will students graduate later if the summer? No, students will not graduate later if the summer internship lasts longer. So in other words, if your summer internship is a 6-month internship, you will still graduate in October. As long as you complete the requirements for the internship, which is 10 weeks, 10 weeks full-time, 35 hours a week. So as long as you've completed that, your internship can be, as Chris said, your full-time job. It doesn't need to be over by the time that you graduate.
We've also had students do hybrid internships where they're part-time at one place and part-time at another. Like, let's say you want to do some writing, but you also want to do some podcast production. We've made that work in the past.
All right. So last time I said speak now or forever hold your peace, we did get one last one.
There's a hand up.
Oh, great. Who has a hand up?
Okay, go ahead, Jacqueline.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline. Thank you all so much for hosting this session today. It's been great. I'm just curious about writing assignments for class. Do the subject matter typically relate to the research assistant placements, or how do students typically go about finding new stories or new research opportunities?
That's a great question. So no, your assignments for class do not need to relate to your RA-ship. Sometimes one of the things that we do encourage you to do in the RA position is start to build a network of sources. So you might hear of a story in your RA position that you want to then pitch. There'll be some situations in which you probably can't write a story about something that you're working on in your RA position. But in terms of finding stories, that's something that's one of those things, sort of like finding internships, that students are always worried about when they get here. How am I going to think of this many news stories and this many different topics? There is no shortage of stories once you get here, and we will work with you on finding stories. But I think the challenge usually is figuring out what of your stories what of the possible stories you want to choose to write. But there are, for each segment, there are different ways that we go about that. So in the news segment, Tim works with you on finding things that are happening, going through pre-publication journal releases, going through something like PubMed. And then for podcasting, Cynthia works with you on thinking about what types of topics would have audio that would be suitable for radio or for podcasting. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? No? All right. Well, if you do have more questions, as Shannon said, you can ask them virtually. We will post this in a couple of days, hopefully in a couple of days, as soon as we get it captioned. And thank you all for spending almost 2 hours on a Friday afternoon coming and learning about the program. We look forward to reading your applications, or we wish you luck on whatever you choose to do in the future. It's as a program, we think that communicating and writing about science is really a public good. It's a public calling. I think if there's one thing that the last several years have shown, it's the need for responsible and accurate science journalism. And so if you don't come here and you go into this career, we would totally support that. It's more important to us that people communicate about science, and they communicate about science after having come here. So thank you all. And hopefully we'll be seeing some of you in person in the future. Bye, everyone.